Ladies and gentlemen, it's not Christmas time, but it's Christmas in May because I clicked the wrong button, and you should all be excited all year round because Dynasty is the year-round format. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Evan. Evan, how are you tonight?
Pretty good, Mike. Pretty good. We're weathering the storm here in Nashville. A little bit of thunder, a little bit of lightning. So it's a great day.
Thunder and lightning, like Gus Edwards and everybody else in Los Angeles. We are joined tonight by a special guest, Josh Larkey. You can find him on Twitter at JLarkeyTweets. Josh, how are you?
Guys, I'm doing really well. As you know, all that the listeners know, this is a big day for the Denver community. The Nuggets were down 2-0 in Denver. They lose 2 games to the Timberwolves. They go to Minnesota, and then they win 2. It is now knotted up 2 apiece. They come back home. I will be at the game later tonight. So if the Nuggets lose tonight, this podcast will be the highlight of my night. And if the Nuggets win, I will have 2 highlights of my night.
Perfect. Yeah, I was going to say, either way, this should be the best part of your evening because it is the best part of ours. We're going to talk about some Dynasty Fantasy Football. And, I mean, there's a little wrinkle there. All the best redraft players play Dynasty, as we know. Evan, you wrote this question, but I'm going to ask it to you first. Who is your favorite 2026 prospect?
Yeah, so I love watching college football, Mike. I sit down in the game room, watch one on each screen. I got 4 screens down there. I get my laptop up, get my phone up. Got 6 games going all at once. And my favorite right now to watch is Zachariah Branch. Should actually be USC's #1 wide receiver this year, going into his true sophomore season. Absolute just freak on the field, freak athlete. Lots of fun to be able to watch, and it keeps you up for those West Coast games.
You always need a reason to stay awake to watch. I mean, East Coast dads are just slinging through it at 10 p.m. trying to watch it. I want to talk about Archie Manning. Listen, the name is there. The prospect profile is there. The on-field play is there from what we've seen during spring games and practice. All of the signs are pointing to a huge breakout in 2025 if he doesn't just outright steal Quinn Ewers' job in 2024. But we have other things to get into, much more important.
And now it's time for news and notes.
All right, everybody's favorite Kirk Cousins replacement / clone, Jared Goff, 4-year, $212 million extension with $170 million guaranteed. On that, Evan, what would you be willing to buy Jared Goff for in Dynasty?
Would you sell him to me for the 106?
That is about my line. So it depends on where my team's at. If I need the stability of the quarterback with a contract extension, I'm keeping Goff. If I need the young upside in a Drake May, a JJ McCarthy, maybe I get lucky and Jaden Daniels falls to 106. I think that's a pretty solid line. Josh, do you disagree or do you have other thoughts on Goff?
Yeah, I think it would be after the 105. Since I would assume that Daniels and May are off the board by then, I would definitely rather have them. I think I'd rather have Goff than Penix. I just don't know when Penix is going to start. We'll talk about him more later. And then with JJ McCarthy, I think that's kind of a good decision point where I think we should look at least for right now, McCarthy in kind of this 3-4 year window, which is where we're starting to see the NFL shift with these non-premium quarterbacks, especially these young ones where in the past, someone like Justin Fields just probably would have been extended. It wouldn't have been a big issue. Kenny Pickett, they probably would have just at least ridden out that rookie contract. So I think someone like McCarthy, it starts to get a little bit dicier. Same thing with Bo Nix. I think they're kind of in the bucket of we'll see how year 1 goes. So I think at least like right now, it's starting to be a conversation, Goff versus those two.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think there's going to be a lot of fun people talking about the Jared Goff's point per game versus his end of year finish. He's been a picture of health. Plays in a dome, is able to give you that longevity throughout the season. But in an earth-shattering move, may be the biggest news that you've ever heard all year. Zay Jones signs with the Arizona Cardinals for 1 year, $4.25 million. RIP Michael Wilson season. Does anybody have any thoughts on Zay Jones? All right, that's enough.
Let's get into the meat and potatoes.
All right, so we're going to have a little bit of a shortened night tonight so that Josh can go catch that Denver game. But we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about either veterans or rookies that their outlook was tanked during the NFL draft or through other moves throughout the offseason. So to be a good host, I'm going to throw it over to our guest first. Josh, who is the first player that you would like to talk about tonight?
I think we should talk about Kyron Williams. I think he's very, very interesting because right now, I guess pre-draft, he was going round 1 in early best ball drafts. He was like the 11th, 12th pick off the board.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's still going around pick 20 in redraft. He's still valued as a consensus top 10 dynasty running back on Keep Trade Cut. So I think this is in many ways kind of the marquee player to sort of figure out. When we look at Kyron Williams, he had 19 carries and 2.7 receptions per game last year. That's a lot of work.
Yep.
Pretty much only Christian McCaffrey's getting more work than that. He was also the RB2 in fantasy points per game behind McCaffrey. When you look at next gen stats, player tracking data, they have something called rush yards over expected per attempt. That sounds very confusing, but it is basically looking at player tracking data. So they're looking at the running back, the offensive line, the defense, and they're basically saying per carry, was this guy as a running back, if we try to isolate running back in net positive or net negative, next gen stats had Kyron Williams as the 7th best running back last year on a per touch basis. I talk a lot about how we always want to think about how many carries and touches a guy gets when talking about per touch stats, especially at running back. And what I always say is, think about what your mile time is, your fastest mile. And I'd say, okay, like you run it in 7 minutes, great. So you could definitely run 5 miles in 35 minutes then, right? And people are like, well, no, because I'm getting tired. And I'm like, yeah. NFL running backs are humans. That's why someone like Tony Pollard starts to get more carries. It turns out he's going to be a little bit less efficient. Najee Harris is definitely not a pinnacle of efficiency, but I bet he'd be more efficient if he got 5 carries a game instead of 15 to 20. So the fact that Kyron Williams was efficient on a per touch basis with a ton of work, that's awesome. That's awesome. Problem, terrible pass blocker. Blake Corum led all running backs to the combine with 27 bench press reps. That's the same as Joe Alt, the offensive tackle the Chargers took at pick 5. Something tells me that if Corum can bench like an absolute truck, he's probably going to be able to pass block at the NFL level. He had over 500 combined carries the past 2 seasons, so we know that he can handle volume from what we saw at Michigan. So right now, I think I'm leaning towards selling Kyron Williams. Keep Trade Cut, he's RB9. A guy that's slightly below him is Jonathan Brooks. And there's a little bit of a value gap with Brooks at RB11. If I had Kyron Williams, I would happily take Jonathan Brooks and a 2nd round pick in 2025. And I would just get rid of that headache because I think Blake Corum's for real. And I think there's a slight chance Corum's just better. But I think what most likely happens is he somehow cuts into Kyron's work. And if Kyron were to get injured, then Blake Corum just goes absolutely nuts for fantasy.
It would be absolutely heartbreaking if Kyron Williams goes down, Blake Corum continues to be the back that we've seen him be at Michigan, handle the rock, be efficient, be the one cut and go kind of guy. He always gets what's blocked for him, which is what McVay's going to love. And then maybe Kyron just never even comes back. Like he just gets buried on the depth chart and we just see the day 3 running back lose all of his value overnight. I agree with selling him for Jonathan Brooks in a second. If you didn't know you were able to get Jonathan Brooks, but it was maybe the 112, the 201, and a future second, would you still be selling?
Yes.
Splendid.
I want to get rid of pretty much every single running back in Dynasty that's expensive who's not named Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, or Jahmyr Gibbs. Basically, every other expensive veteran, they are not going to be on my Dynasty rosters. At least not if I can help it with the trades I'm offering or trying to finagle.
Yep. And then you can go buy an Aaron Jones, a Derrick Henry, a really gross, crusty back when you're making your playoff push.
Yes.
In order to get through as many of these players as we can, let's move to who you want to talk about. Tell me who you would love to talk about being bad at football and you hate them.
Sounds good. Let's talk about Josh Jacobs here for a little bit. All right. So everybody seemed to think that it was a smash landing spot with the contract that he got, and he's been slowly coming back down to earth. All right. When we start talking about him, we start talking about that offense in Green Bay, how they use multiple running backs. We start talking about the draft capital that got invested in Marshawn Lloyd here. On top of it, they retained A.J. Dillon. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that A.J. Dillon contract at all. We look at the pass catchers. We look at what they did in that offense last year, the amount of pass attempts that they threw, the way that they ran that offense. And I'm just starting to think, okay, I'm going to try and sell Josh Jacobs. And what would I be looking for to be able to get for Josh Jacobs? If you told me realm of possibilities here, if you told me a 25 second and a 25 third.
Ooh, I feel like that's selling kind of low.
sell him kind of low, but I don't believe in him. So if I'm not believing in him, I'm going to get what I can in the market. You know, you want to throw me back a old, crusty, maybe not really worth anything type of running back. Like, okay, instead of that third, can I get a fourth and Nick Chubb?
Yeah.
Can I get a second, a fourth and Nick Chubb and just bank on Chubb being that second half going into the playoff run flex type running back? That's going to give me relatively similar production, maybe a tick down to what Josh Jacobs is. And I just got a second that now I can be more flexible with to go buy a guy. If all of a sudden somebody goes down on my roster, it gives me that second and the fourth to go buy maybe a spot start running back. I know last year, I mean, you could get Jerome Ford when Chubb went down for a second. People were trading him left and right for that. And he was a smash on your roster.
100%. Also, when we're talking about Josh Jacobs, he was, contrast to Kyron Williams, he was not efficient at all in Las Vegas. Now he does go to Green Bay, which the opportunities are going to be better. It is easier to run the ball when your quarterback is Jordan Love than when your quarterback is Aiden O'Connell. But we haven't seen a good history of inefficient running backs going to a new team and holding on to their job. Miles Sanders comes to mind. Lately, we have been burned by him, but it's hard to be excited about Josh Jacobs. Other Josh Larkey, do you have any thoughts on Josh Jacobs?
I like Josh Jacobs. I think part of this, though, might be I just want pieces of the Packers offense.
Mm-hmm.
I've already taken a lot of futures in the betting markets on them to win the division, to actually win the NFC overall. I took these very, very early, pretty much like right when lines opened after this past Super Bowl. What I liked about that offense, just in general, since I think with Jacobs, he's going to get some kind of volume if he can hold up to it and play well. And I think there's a lot of running backs kind of in that position of like, we don't really know if they're good or not. Like Jacobs was good 2 years ago. He was really bad last year. I'm not quite sure where I fall in terms of like, is he actually a good running back? But what I liked is that the Packers were the youngest offense in the NFL last year, and they were still a top 12 scoring offense. Jordan Love was second in the NFL in touchdown passes, despite Christian Watson missing major time, Jaden Reed being a part-time player for half the year, Romeo Doubs getting way too many snaps. Dontavian Wick started to come on towards the end, but he was even dealing with injuries. Aaron Jones was hurt. The tight ends were hurt, and they were rookies. So I think this is an offense that I'm trying to invest in. I wouldn't say that I love Jacobs in Dynasty per se, but at this point, I think I'd either be buying or neutral with most of the Packers players.
That makes sense. Just being excited about the Packers in general, it brings to mind when we're trying to invest in the Bengals because just Joe Burrow elevated everything. Now we're trying to buy into the Texans because CJ Stroud is elevating everything. Like Jordan Love is the kind of quarterback that is elevating that offense, and the system is just working beautifully there. I'm going to shift out of running backs because there's a couple names here that make me really sad, but I'm going to move into a tight end that he just sent a dagger into my heart, Michael Mayer. I loved him as a prospect coming out. I thought that he was going to be solid. I think that he can still be a very good tight end, and if the Raiders use 12 personnel, maybe he becomes okay. But we're talking about a low-end tight end too, or in big tight end premium leagues, you're able to use him as a flex option when you're really, really down in the muck. But any hope of volume, any hope of a year two breakout, any hope of the Trey McBride plan have all gone away unless he gets traded or moved. Thoughts, anybody?
Yeah, what is it? Aaron Hernandez? Is that the only tight end two in the history of fantasy football that actually did something? Like Dallas Goedert was like sort of a low end fantasy tight end one at times when he was playing with Zach Ertz, sometimes a fantasy tight end two. That doesn't get me out of bed. If you told me like this is the ceiling for his next 3 years of his rookie contract. So I was very, I have a few Mayer shares in Dynasty, and nobody is buying.
They are stuck, and I don't even know what to do with him on my rosters right now. I cannot sell him because all you're getting, what could you get for him? A 25 fourth? Maybe a third for a really tight end hungry manager. Like those aren't needle movers. So really, I think you're putting him there, and maybe Bowers gets hurt and then Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell decide to throw it to their backup tight end. It's hoping for a lot, but I'll cross his name off the list. Josh, who would you like to talk about next?
Oh boy, let's pour one out for Adonai Mitchell. So first off, the guy goes mid round 2 in the NFL draft. Many projected he would go in round 1. A lot of people were hemorrhaging money in the betting markets. He was at one point a minus 800 favorite to go in the first round. And you might be like, well, Josh, that was probably a long time ago. No, that was the day before the NFL draft began. He essentially had an 88% implied chance to go round 1. He slipped. The NFL hates the guy. He goes to the Colts, probably the 5th option in this offense. Disgusting. He's definitely behind Michael Pittman in the passing game. I think he's probably behind, at least for this year, Josh Downs as well, who had nearly 70 catches as a rookie and looks like a true target earner. He's definitely behind Jonathan Taylor in the running game. He's probably behind Anthony Richardson in the running game. I just don't know how this guy's going to consistently score touchdowns, consistently get targets. I think this was a fine real football pick to stretch the field where they're basically taking a mulligan on the Alec Pierce pick.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, what the heck are we doing? He's wide receiver 41 on Keep Trade Cut. I'm going to list some names after him where I would rather have this player, and then I'd even give up like a second on top of it to get rid of Adonai Mitchell if he happened to be on my team. Christian Kirk, Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson, Rashee Rice, Chris Godwin. Oh my goodness. There are so many names. You can just go, bup. There's like 15, 20 names at least in Dynasty that are currently, perception has them lower than AD Mitchell. I have zero interest in seeing what this offense looks like because some people might be like, let's see the Colts offense. It's like low pass volume. It was never a high target earner. I don't know what we want. This was the worst landing spot. I have players that were day 3 receivers, a couple of them ranked ahead of him in my rookie rankings. This was truly worst case.
Yep. I love the call out that he was minus 800 the day before because he was also, his over under for draft position was 17.5. That was day of the draft, right before we were going. Not as we're moving through the clock, like right before. So unfortunate that he went in the second round. Unfortunate that he went to the Colts. Best case scenario for him, he is the wide receiver 2 on a team with an extremely mobile quarterback. He's not going to put up wide receiver 41 numbers, and there's really not a path forward for him unless something terrible happens to Pittman. So I don't see the role for him in the offense. I don't see the role for him for fantasy, but he's going to have a really cool touchdown this year that I'm going to get really excited about. Evan, who's your next guy?
Yeah, so my guy is more one that took a hit during the draft, less so during the offseason, because I actually think he's been steamed up all offseason. And I'm going to go with Will Levis here, mainly because of the fact that they didn't get an offensive line. Look, they get J.C. Latham. It's not who everybody here in Nashville wanted. It's not who everybody thought was going to be the pick in Joe Alt. It's not anything more to that offensive line. Okay, yeah, they added Cushenberry at center. Okay, that's going to make the line a little bit better. What do they still not have? They still don't have a left tackle. They still don't have a right guard of any consequence. All right. Yes, they added fancy playmakers. Yes, when you listen to the owner talk, she wants them to pass the ball more. She wants them to score the ball more. That's why they went out and got all these playmakers, and they signed an offensive-minded head coach. You put all of that together, he should have a good offseason bump. But what's the issue with that? Well, going into the draft, people were expecting him to get an offensive line heavy draft. And when you go to the Titans draft, you get J.C. Latham, then you get Sweat, defensive tackle, Gray, linebacker, and you get more defense. Only other pick is Jaquan Jackson as a wide receiver out of Tulane. Definitely not going to make an impact this year because we know what they've done at wide receiver, bringing in 3 wide receivers that are probably going to start over every other wide receiver that was already on that team. Well, maybe Hopkins, Yep. All right, Hopkins goes. He's going to be, one of the wide receivers there. So they have 3 wide receivers. And, yeah, his value has just gone too high. I mean, I have dynasty leagues where people are asking for a 108 for him. I'm not willing to pay a 108, especially after this draft and after seeing that offensive line last year multiple times in person. It's going to be porous. It's going to be like Swiss cheese, and that's concerning for any kind of development where he doesn't feel like he has to play hero ball.
Josh, gun to your head. Will Levis or Bo Nix?
Oh, boy. I think I'd go Levis slightly, simply because I have no idea what the Broncos are doing. And I think if they don't have a good season, Sean Payton might leave, and then it looks disastrous. Mm-hmm. But I also don't really have faith in Levis to make it through the season looking good enough to be the starter next year. So, oh man, you know what? I'll stick with Levis simply because I think he's going to have a better September than Bo Nix, which could give you a selling point where he does have a much better supporting cast right now on paper. But truly, these are not the quarterbacks I want. I'm usually trying to package to get really elite quarterback talent, especially in super flex leagues. So I don't really have a lot of Levis Knicks type players.
Yeah, these are the kind of guys you wait for a spike week, like the 4 touchdown week, and then you go ahead and you
Yeah.
get rid of them immediately. But yeah, I have a little bit of faith in Will Levis. That might be Titans' eyes for my high point days. RIP to that. But no, don't really see a way forward for him to be fantasy relevant in 2026, which if you're talking about a 2 to 3 year window, it's tough to look at. Let's talk about another quarterback in Derek Carr. So Derek Carr, already don't love the guy. The contract got moved so that they're probably stuck with him on the roster, but it didn't show that they're committed to him long-term as a starter. Then they go ahead and take Spencer Rattler, and they don't add any other wide receivers of note. So the surrounding and supporting cast didn't get any better. He's already a year older with a shoulder injury on his throwing shoulder. I've heard that doesn't work well for over 30-year-olds, or even like I'm 27. If I hurt my throwing shoulder, I'm not throwing anything for a couple of months. So I just don't see any way that he is bringing use to your fantasy teams other than as a spot starter quarterback 2, which if you need a spot starter quarterback 2, yeah, go grab Derek Carr. But there's not like they didn't gain anything, and he brought in some serious competition for his starting spot, even though it's a 5th round pick. Josh, Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, who wins the job in October?
I mean, I'm not a huge Derek Carr guy, but come on, it's a 5th round pick. Derek Carr's got 2 more extremely expensive guaranteed deals on his contract. 2025, he's owed over $50 million in base salary. Yep. I think Derek Carr's their starter. So, I mean, maybe Rattler impresses. Do you have an example of a 5th round quarterback just overtaking a veteran in year 1? I honestly can't think of someone that has like a reasonable resume like Derek Carr. Like Derek, I wouldn't say Derek Carr's great, but I think he has a case every year for like the 16th best quarterback in the NFL. I think he's good enough that like there are definitely teams out there that will consistently pay a quarterback like Carr. I mean, teams passed over Rattler 4 times.
100%. Yep.
So I'm not in love with Carr, but I'd be blown away if Rattler overtook him.
Yep. It would be funny, but also of 5th round picks, like how many have been the former number 1 overall recruit? How many we talk about the off the field things with Rattler? Like he's cleaned a lot of those up, but he still has that dog in him in the locker room. I could see him walking in there telling Derek Carr to sit in the corner, and then all of a sudden all of his receivers are in love with him because they all hate Carr already.
I'll give you an example. So this feels like Kayshon Boutte, the consensus wide receiver 1 in his class for an extended period. And the NFL let us know that they did not believe in him. I don't even know if he's still on the Patriots roster.
Yep. I think
he might be on a different team. I truly don't even know where he is right now because he's so irrelevant. Yep. I think Rattler's better than that. I think he is their backup quarterback. Yep. But I think we have to trust the NFL because that was the first name I thought of because I was like, all right, have there been guys with this much hype? And I feel like Boutte is actually like a different position, but reasonable comp in terms of most people had him as the wide receiver 1 in his class at one time or another.
And then the double ankle surgery, the weird running trains on like just all sorts of nonsense going on. Definitely. I'm not saying it is probable, but I already hate Derek Carr and would love for them to move off of him. I think that the Saints team, because of how bad they could be, even moving away from the Rattler in this year discussion, like he needs to watch his back in 2025. Like they could be bad enough that they're picking top 5 and they're taking a 1st round quarterback. But instead of talking about Derek Carr all night, because that puts a gross taste in my mouth, Josh, who's the next player you'd like to talk about?
Well, if we're going to start talking about guys with terrible draft capital like Spencer Rattler, guy that really annoyed me in the draft was Troy Franklin.
There it is.
Potential for early to mid round 2 draft capital. Nope, he falls to round 4. He might be potentially dead in Dynasty. It's a pretty bad track record. There's guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's guys like Puka Nacua. I'd say a big difference is that Amon-Ra ended up having Goff, who's pretty good. And Puka Nacua ended up having Matthew Stafford, a potential future Hall of Famer. Troy Franklin has Bo Nix. Fortunately, that was his college quarterback. Unfortunately, I just don't believe much, as we talked about in Bo Nix. I guess like the wide receiver depth chart there is super weak. So like the Franklin, Mims. There's a lot of guys kind of vying for who's going to be wide receiver 2. Cortland Sutton himself isn't a big target earner. So I think there's real potential for Franklin compared to round 4 picks. Like tons of potential. But at the same time, I would have loved if he just went there in like the second round instead of the 4th. So we just have to adjust. I do have him ranked 1 spot ahead of AD Mitchell in my dynasty rankings. Simply because at least Franklin has a path. He has a path.
Yeah.
I don't really believe in Sutton. It's not like they're trying to extend him, whereas the Colts chomped at the bit for Pittman to get extended. But still, it was bad news for Franklin, where if he's not on the team in a year or two, that's not a shocking outcome for a 4th round pick.
100%. It drives an arrow into my heart because if you made a mock draft in February or March and you didn't have Troy Franklin in the top 50 picks, you got laughed off of Twitter. And then all of a sudden, here it is. Didn't end up happening. I wrote an article recently for Last Word on Sports. It's doing draft capital hit rates by round. And of all day 3 receivers, so 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, there were 211 players drafted between 2011 and 2021. Of those 211, only 6 have hit. So if you like a 6 out of 211 chance, take a swing on Troy Franklin. Let's see how it goes. But it's just the future is bleak. It's unfortunate. I don't want to talk about the Broncos ever again. Evan, your turn.
Whoa, real quick though. With how awful that wide receiver room is,
there's a shot.
Over under 118 targets for Cortland Sutton.
Ooh. I'm going to say over. Just because there's no one else there and Bo Nix is stuck throwing to him.
I mean, is that going to be the case?
How many did he have last year?
Oh, God.
He had 90.
I'm pulling that up. I don't think about Sutton. He's not someone that's on my radar much. He had 90 the year before. He had 109. I don't know. I would just he's only done that once in his career, so I'll just lean under because of injuries. If he stays healthy, I think that's actually a pretty good line if he plays all 17 games. I just don't think they're going to pass very much.
Yeah, I mean they might have to though. They might get behind. Never know that defense, especially if they end up making some trades to get rid of some stars on that defense.
I think they should.
It's been rumored,
Yep.
Yeah.
After Sean Payton didn't want to live and coach through a rebuild, he goes to the Broncos and immediately launches a rebuild.
Yeah, he's not long for that job. But man. All right. So let's keep the train going here, and we're going to talk about a guy who is a little dirty, but being an Eagles fan here, Eagles heart, Kenneth Gainwell. He's dead, absolutely dead. Yes, Mike, I get it. You don't think that who they brought in is very good in Will Shipley.
But Saquon Barkley's good.
But it's another running back, and Saquon's there. Yep. Right? What have they historically like to do? They like to use 3 running backs. So sure, you can make the argument, but at this point, you're not getting a 4th for Gainwell, which makes him a cut candidate in my book. Any other feelings other than a cut candidate?
No, I mean, he's like Justice Hill on the Ravens. Like all of these injuries kept happening. And we were like, oh, it's finally time. And then he doesn't actually get the lead role because he's just not that good. So I'd have no problem cutting him to make room for your rookie picks. Josh, any thoughts on Kenny Gainwell?
I think you cut him. The team just took a guy that's probably better than him with the exact same skill set. I don't think they would have taken Shipley in round 4 if they thought he was going to be their 3rd string back. So I think we just have to listen to what they're telling us. And I think Boston Scott got re-signed, if I remember correctly. I don't see where the place for Gainwell is on this roster.
Yeah, which look out, Giants. Boston Scott's going to score 3 touchdowns because that's all he does. That'll be the one game. But speaking of the Giants, I'm going to talk about one of my heartthrobs that I thought was going to be good, and then Malik Neighbors showed up. Wan'Dale Robinson, pour some out for him. In last year, with all of the quarterback turmoil and coaching turmoil and the Giants just being generally terrible, he had a couple of wide receiver 1 and 2 weeks. Like I think he had 4 or 5. So there were signs of life as he was recovering from his ACL tear. But now they bring in an elite target earner who is explosive and everything that you want in a wide receiver prospect. Would have been the wide receiver 1 if Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't exist. So you have to sell him. And if you can sell him for a truther that's still looking for a second or even just a random 25 third, just get him off of your roster before he becomes useless after this year. Evan, would you sell him for the 25 third?
No, 25 fourth, you know? Oh, sorry. Would I buy him for a 25 third?
No, but you'd
No.
buy him for a 25 fourth?
But I buy him for a 25 fourth. Yeah, give me a little bit of hope there. You know, a fourth round. What's the odds that a fourth round pick ends up actually hitting? Pretty slim. So if I can get a spike week, maybe 2 in a best ball league, sure, why not? There's not many people to get receptions in that offense, so somebody's got to catch the ball.
I think he's just roster clogging sadness at this point, and I would rather move off of him before I continue to hold on to him, just praying for a spike week. But Josh, who would you like to talk about next?
Let's talk about Drake May. So I talked on the player profiler draft stream. I was like, guys, this is the doomsday landing spot. Now I still have Drake May 105 for Superflex, where I have Caleb, Daniels, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and then May. But like if Drake May went second overall instead of Daniels, he would have been my 102 behind Caleb Williams. The New England landing spot, it's rough. It's rough. I think if he survives his rookie season, I will 100% be buying Drake May. My pre-draft comp is almost Justin Herbert as a passer with the legs of Daniel Jones. I think we can envision how a competent passer that runs like Daniel Jones can have a lot of fantasy value.
Mm-hmm.
But we have seen so many quarterbacks that go to these disastrous landing spots and develop bad habits in year one. This receiving core is completely devoid of an actual wide receiver 1. There's a bunch of like wide receiver 3 types on the roster where there's a lot of guys where I'm like, yeah, that would be fine as an NFL team's wide receiver 3 this year. And that's kind of it. I mean, Hunter Henry could legitimately lead this team in targets. Ramondre Stevenson or Antonio Gibson could legitimately lead this team in targets. Those are possible in the range of outcomes. It's probably someone like Jalen Polk or Kendrick Bourne, but I mean, God, this is scary. I really just, I think there's a real chance that halfway through this season, we're looking at Drake May like we did with Zach Wilson. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Drake May is a much better prospect, but I think I don't think I could have found a worse landing spot than the Patriots.
Yep. And we haven't even talked about how the offensive line, I think they called Evan to ask if he could play. Like, they are looking absolutely disgusting out there. It's funny because last week we had a guest on that was raving about how Drake May is going to turn them around and everything's going to be exciting in New England. And it's tough to see that range of outcomes for Drake May. Evan.
What if there's a Carson Wentz career arc here?
Oh,
you know, it seems relatively similar to the situations of what I was remembering from Carson's days in Philly. You know, you start getting a couple targets around him, a couple players around him. Next year, he starts to take that step forward. And then third season comes around, he actually looks like something and then just falls off an absolute cliff. Maybe.
Sorry, I went back and I was looking at the 2018 Philadelphia Eagles roster just to feel something again.
Starts playing a little bit of hero ball.
Nelson Aguilar back in his all-star days.
Oh, yes. Gotta love it.
It was a pretty terrible depth chart. Though I think I'd say that Zach Ertz, Jordan Matthews, that's Nelson Aguilar, like that's actually somehow better than what the Patriots have.
Which is
not much better.
Terrifying.
But it's like,
and
I think I'd rather have that supporting cast, but I mean, that's a good parallel. It is close.
And even you look back then, like they had, that's 2018 was when they were medium. Let's go back all the way to 2016. They had Jason Peters, a left tackle, and Jason Kelsey in the center. The rest of the offensive line was despicable, but at least they had 2 guys that they could build around. But yeah, maybe he gets lucky on a Carson Wentz type career arc and without the ACL tear or spine being fractured. Both of those would be rough. Let's avoid the tight ends because those are always gross to talk about. I want to talk about Gabe Davis. So listen, Gabe Davis, however you feel about him, he was a great spike week candidate that you could be like, well, I don't know who I'm going to start in my flex this week. I'm going to throw Gabe Davis in there. Maybe he catches a long touchdown and wins me my week. Now they bring in a player that does the exact same thing, but better. They took all of Gabe Davis's best attributes and pushed the sliders all the way to the top, and took all of his worst attributes and pushed them up a little bit more. Brian Thomas Jr. is going to steal all of his snaps out wide. He's going to take all of his targets. He's going to do everything to be Gabe Davis, but cool. And it's unfortunate because there was still some value to be had. He's played with Josh Allen, which has obviously elevated his fantasy output, but Trevor Lawrence also has a nice deep ball. Like, there were opportunities for him this offense, and all of them seemingly have dissipated overnight of the draft. RIP to the roller coaster of love, Gabe Davis. Josh, would you buy Gabe Davis or a third?
I mean, why would we want him on our roster?
For fun.
Yeah, I generally just avoid these players. I don't think you could give him to me at this point. I mean, every guy has a price, but I wouldn't be. I guess I'll put it this way: I'd have to offload a very dusty veteran receiver to take Davis on my team. This is not a player that I'm trying to sell any kind of picks for, simply because I'm just not sure when I'm starting him. Truly,
I'll give you Juju Smith-Schuster at a 2027 fourth. Call it a deal.
I would take that.
All right. Cool. That's enough Gabe Davis for tonight. Josh, let's roll through. We could probably make it another round or two around. So pick a player you really feel passionate about.
So let's talk about Chuba Hubbard, because the Panthers, if you didn't know anything about football and you just glanced at Chuba Hubbard's career, you might think the Panthers like him. You'd go, wow, this guy had 200 touches as a rookie. Didn't do much in year 2, but then year 3, he comes back strong. Year 3, this past season, the guy had over 275 touches, 238 carries, 39 receptions, and there's a lot of context missing. So 2021 is rookie year. Christian McCaffrey gets hurt. So that is why Chuba Hubbard gets work. The next year, he doesn't really play. It's not very good. Then last year, he plays a lot because the team hated Miles Sanders. And I think it's cool. Yeah, sure. Chuba Hubbard, better than Miles Sanders. Maybe. That's fine. But then what does the team do in this draft? They trade up in the second round to take the first running back in the draft in Jonathan Brooks in the early second round. Now, anytime a team is trading up in the second round to take a running back, that is a strong indictment on the current running back room. I've seen people out there that think Chuba Hubbard might have a real place in this offense. I think that is hilarious. Why? What is he going to be doing? I don't even know. Miles Sanders might keep playing. Miles Sanders was actually a lot better than Chuba Hubbard, aside from last year. Maybe Sanders was just dealing with an injury. I think at best, Chuba Hubbard is a handcuff. And I think at worst, he ends up being the RB3 on this roster. It's still not an offense that we really want to invest in. And I just keep seeing some optimism about Chuba Hubbard, and I think we should crush that.
Just step on it, take any life out of it possible. Jonathan Brooks, great running back prospect in his own right. I saw somebody say today, like, oh, Chuba Hubbard, he broke Barry Sanders' record at Oklahoma. It's like, cool. What has he done in the NFL? He's been inefficient. He's been a handcuff at best. And now when he did finally get a workload, the team invested heavily the following year. That's not a dynasty player that we want to be invested in. Speaking of dynasty players we don't want to be invested in, Evan, I'm going to jump over you to talk about another running back. What if I told you there was a 17-year-old that had almost 1,300 rushing yards in the Big Ten? And then he comes in the draft and he goes day 3 to the freaking Jets. I hate the Jets. I hate everything that they do. They're the worst team in the NFL. They ruined my soul. I liked Izzy Abanikanda when he was coming out. Obviously, like, he was limited in what he can do, but straight line speed, hit the hole and go for a long touchdown. He had the speed, he had the size, he had the contact balance. Then they go ahead and take Braylon Allen, and they bury Izzy Abanikanda further. Then they go ahead. I think they took Isaiah Davis later. Like, they just keep taking running backs for funsies. When you already have one of the best running backs in the league in Breece Hall, you're not putting Braylon Allen on the field outside of injury. So Braylon Allen, unfortunately, is dead. He went from, like, we were making water bets about whether or not he would go top 100. He goes well outside the top 100 to a terrible landing spot. Evan, is there any hope for Braylon Allen in Dynasty unless Breece Hall gets injured?
Yeah, that is the key right there, unless he gets injured, which you don't want that, because I have a lot of Breece Hall shares. You have a lot of Breece Hall shares. Yep, he is heavily rostered because he is easily a top 3 running back in fantasy football. So no, he has no value at this point. He is an absolute roster clogging running back. not a handcuff that I would even want to have, because you look at that Jets offensive line and you look at Aaron Rodgers and you look at the pass catchers and you say, okay, well, if Breece Hall goes down, they're not going to be running the ball much.
Yep. I mean, is there a starker difference in going from Wisconsin and running the ball to going to the New York Jets in 2024 and running the ball? Like, that is night and day. That is like playing Madden on rookie mode and then going to all Madden overnight. It's not fair. I am so sad. I'm going to be really mad about this for the rest of time. So, Evan, I'm going to throw it over to you. Who is the last player you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so the last player that I want to talk about is actually Tua. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I see a little bit of hesitancy there, Mike. Okay. So let's look at that team right now. They added Odell. All right, that's going to be their wide receiver 3. They still have Tyreek. They still have Waddle. They have Johnny at tight end now, Durham Smythe. All right, okay, whatever. But the offensive line, what happened? They lost their best interior offensive lineman. They're getting a new center, installing a new center in that offense, coming over from Tennessee. What did we know about the Tennessee offensive line last year? Wasn't very good. Sure, Aaron Brewer was probably the best player on that offensive line last year. But you're looking at Isaiah Wynn, left guard, did not have an illustrious career, hasn't had an illustrious career. Robert Jones stepping in at right guard. Oh, man, what do we know about Tua? Not the most mobile guy. So pressure right up the middle probably isn't a good thing for him. And then you look at Teron Armstead, who's supposed to be their stalwart left tackle, and the fact that he hasn't played a full season the last 3 seasons leads for offensive line questions. What is Tua really good at? Anticipatory passing. And he's going to have to use that a whole heck of a lot because he's not going to have much time to throw this year.
At least he took jiu-jitsu so he can ninja roll out of his sacks. So we're all really excited about that. I don't want to run over on time tonight because I know Josh has to go watch the Nuggets crush the Timberwolves. But real quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. As you've seen across the bottom, we're sponsored by Trophy Smack. Go ahead and use code RPG at checkout. We're also sponsored by Dubby. Use code FFRPG. Really just put in RPG and some FFs anywhere you buy things and just see if it works or not. Maybe one day we'll be able to buy Evan a microphone. But Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you coming on.
Fired at the end of it. Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
I think I sound all right, Mike. Come on.
Sorry, I mean the show's closing out, so I don't know if you're gonna get to talk again. But Josh, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate you, brother. You want to let the people know where to find you if they're still listening?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at JLarkyTweets. Check out the Player Profiler Podcast Network. I do a show called The Dominator. That is a weekly show, primarily best ball focused, but I always weave in Dynasty and just pure redraft takes throughout it. Sometimes a little bit of betting takes as well. I've given out some season-long prop bets on that show recently, since ultimately I think everything's very interconnected with what we do. And guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a blast. Evan, you want to give one more player you hate?
One more player I hate. I thought we just went over all of them. Okay, let's go Alec Pierce because he's dead.
Okay, RIP to Alec Pierce. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.